Okay, so we've talked about what you can do, and we've talked about a lot of different opportunities to serve. But then at some point, it's going to come down to, okay, where do I get these people, and how do I get them, raise their awareness and get them committed to what we're doing? So I'm going to throw out a whole bunch of ideas for how to mobilize people. And I encourage you to, again, with a lot of these things, try it out. See what works for your church and your community, and just sharing some of the things that we've found have worked in our community and churches that we've worked with. So I think we've already mentioned, but target the head and the heart. How do we help build and put a face to a really ambiguous, kind of scary topic with story? You are welcome to use any of the stories that we've seen here today, but I encourage you, as you do begin to meet people and interact with people in your community, or as you come across people's stories, story is so powerful for helping communicate the care that we want to have for people. Again, when it's hard to love someone in the abstract, it's easier to remove that fear when we see a face, when we hear a story, when we understand a little bit more where someone's coming from. And story is so powerful for that. We also talk about, engaging their head, using their mind. So, in some of your peace training, you may have seen there's a pathway where we move people from apathy to active. So often we talk to people, and I think I'm guilty of this too, we talk to people in our church like they already are as passionate as we are. We use our communication as one blanket audience of people who should already know these things, should already be at my level of awareness. Well, actually it's a spectrum, and we need to think of people on every level of the spectrum. Is this person apathetic because they're just not aware? Do we need to give them information? Do they even know that this is an issue? Or maybe they're aware, but how do we move them into actually doing things? How do we move them to active? And eventually those people who get involved become advocates. And how do we challenge them to be an advocate, be a voice, and not just, beyond just their serving for themselves? Those are different types of different communications for different levels of commitment. The way we talk to one group may not be as effective for another group. So if we're seeing that spectrum, if we're seeing it as a continuum, I think that helps to mobilize people and pull them into greater levels of commitment. We've already talked about the idea of shape. I hope that your church may use this, they may not, but shape is the idea that God has designed each of us with certain passions and abilities and story, both positive and negative, that he wants to use for his kingdom. So, as you reach out, as you communicate, think not only through where people are in that level of activation, think through shape. Maybe some people are going to really be drawn to the people side of their ministry. Great. Talk about those opportunities. But you may have people who just, for a number of reasons, don't want to interact with people at all. And that's okay. You can serve in our ministry and never have contact with people. There's a great need for administrative help. There's a great need for research help. Thinking through even, I know in my ministry, the difference between the way an extrovert wants to serve and an introvert, I'm not going to give them or market to them the same ministry opportunities. I hope that makes sense. And I think I've mentioned this before, but consider your own story. Your own story of how God mobilized you is powerful. It's okay to be vulnerable that you didn't always necessarily feel this way about your ministry. God uses that. People want to see that you're a real person with real fears and that you moved against it anyway. Those are the stories of faith that help other people to find faith. Again, the other idea of stories is testimonies. Again, either yours or someone that you're serving. It's a big, scary thing to ask someone to share some of their deepest stuff in front of the church. And I always try to be super sensitive to our members that and our friends living with HIV that is, you're asking a big ask of them. I never pressure that. But at the same time, I know that often when I've gone to someone and said, would you consider whether people need to hear this? Consider how this would help serve others to not walk down the same path into the same hurts that you've experienced. That while sometimes there's resistance, sometimes there's an honoring piece of, that God can redeem that story, that story can be used for good things in the future. I even had one where a gentleman who I approached in that way said, "That's so funny, God's been telling me that all week." So, God goes ahead of us in a lot of this mobilization in ways that are really cool to see. And then, like I said, knowledge. We've talked already about reminding people of the scriptural roots of this ministry. We have a small group study where you can help take small groups of people in your church through a smaller, pared down version of kind of what you just experienced of God's heart for the sick. It comes with a video, and you can fill out the fill-ins. You can use any of the videos we've seen here, the little informational pieces. In our church, we've gotten creative with it. We've done interactive maps on our patio after the service. We've done audience demonstrations of standing up that represented percentages of people living with HIV or different populations. We've done art in really cool ways in our big church service and with our youth, and even in the community to help reach, again, that head and that heart piece, and the power of art and creative pieces to touch people in ways that sometimes the dry statistics don't do. For our church, we've done a big thing that we do here is World AIDS Day. So it's the idea that we take a weekend service of the year to just talk about this issue. Now, that may not be feasible for your church, but in the main service, but perhaps it's something where it's an emphasis on the patio, or it's an emphasis with your students to talk about how do we serve and love on the marginalized and the voiceless? How do we mobilize around these issues and serve in our community? What's some tangible things we could do? We worked with our student ministries where they were able to get a little bit of information, heard a testimony from someone from our support group, and then created actually little packets for people to go and serve at an AIDS walk in our community. Always thinking through the lens of mobilizing that head and that heart, and can we start people on a journey of becoming more involved in our ministry just by getting started. Like I said, feel free to steal any of our ideas. They're here to give away. We also have a website, hivinthechurch.com, where a lot of this stuff is downloadable, and we're always trying to share on that blog the ways that we build it and break it so that we can give it away, and everyone can learn from things that we've found that are successful and the things that we found that aren't. So I hope that those are some key elements to help you think through this awareness-raising piece in your church.